All right, man. Well, hey, the NFL action, like you said, was great, but we're going to start in the college ranks, actually, right? It was a fantastic weekend in college football as well.
Yep.
The finalists for the Heisman Trophy were announced on Monday morning. They all obviously have compelling cases, as they usually do, but let's do an internal vote here. Regardless of the actual finalists, Doug, if we here at Four Down Territory, we're responsible for who gets that award, basically the MVP at the top level of college football, right? Obviously, we should be in charge of this, right?
Well, clearly,
this is something we should obviously have the power to do.
Yeah.
Who gets your pick? Who should win the Heisman this year?
So, Luke, I know that defensive players don't win the Heisman. And Ndamukong Suh didn't win it in 2009, which you saw that season, told me all I needed to know.
Yep.
Charles Woodson won it in 97, but he did it as a three-way. He was offense, defense, special teams. I'm going to embrace the futility and ask who has been the best and most transformative and most unstoppable dominant player in college football this season.
I know this one.
Jalen Carter, Georgia defensive. And he's not just a defensive tackle. He plays on the edge about 25% of the time, so it's that kind of Aaron Donald thing. I could go into Carter's metrics or get into his 2022 tape, and I'll be doing that soon enough, believe me, because it's a lot of fun. But let's just put it this way. Carter is utterly unblockable. He had a sack of Hendon Hooker in the Tennessee game where I believe it was the right guard got just bulldozed, and then there was a receiver and a running back trying to block him, and he just kind of went choo-choo like an obstacle course through them and then took Hooker down. You can get into that, but you saw when he sacked LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels in the SEC championship game by picking Daniels up with one hand and raising the number one sign with the other. I think at that exact moment, the Heisman Trophy argument should have been done. And Carter's been doing that this season. He did it last season when Georgia gave 7 defensive players to the NFL draft, and he might have been the best player on that team then. He is certainly the best player in the NCAA now. He should be rewarded accordingly. He won't because he's a defensive player, and that's dumb, but that's who I'd give it to.
Yeah, that sack was great because you had 2, peers on the football field, and one of them looked like a dad who was telling the kids it's time to leave the playground, right?
Yep.
Definitely
he officially turned this car around.
Now, listen, I agree with you. I think if I had a vote, it would go to Jalen Carter, and I'm with you on the whole defense thing. I think even last year when we saw Aiden Hutchinson barely get a bite at it, we didn't see Will Anderson invited to the ceremony at all, which was ridiculous. The Ndamukong Suh thing, it's hard to believe that will ever happen, and Carter, I think, is definitely as deserving as we've ever seen a candidate. I would debate you on this just for the sake of the show, right? And if I had to pick somebody else and try to kind of shine a spotlight on somebody that deserves more attention, I think it's UAB running back Dwayne McBride. It leads the nation with 1,713 yards rushing. He's second in touchdown runs with 19. That's 7.4 yards a carry. He led the nation in rushing so far this year on 100 fewer carries than the guy who was second on that list, Chase Brown from Illinois. So, again, just a guy that's a big play waiting to happen. Say whatever you want about his level of competition, but those numbers are impressive if you're doing it against your little brother in the backyard, right? So, again, I voted for him. He was on my ballot when they asked for finalists for the Maxwell Award. I thought he was one of the best players in college football. He didn't make it to the final, so I had to vote for somebody else on the finalist list. But I think the numbers he's putting up, when you lead the nation in those categories and you're doing it on a carry-by-carry basis, I really don't care who you're playing against. I think he deserves more attention as one of the better players in the nation.
Well, Luke, you and I both evaluate players for the NFL draft. We evaluate prospects. And when you have these players from smaller schools, and it's not like UAB is a, doormat
right.
or anything, you factor in strength of opponent, and you look at that when you're watching tape and looking at the stats, but you also isolate the player. And if the player is spectacular, that will show up, and it will transfer to the NFL. So, strength of competition, I think, is overcooked. I think it's an easy way out for some analysts. I think you need to look beyond that to what makes the player special and what are the transferable skills and just where do you need to go.
He checks the boxes, man. He's got size, he's got patience, vision, explosiveness. I think he can do it all. We'll get to that when draft season comes along. I'm obviously a big fan of his. But we teased to this earlier, Doug. Really, really, really bad trades, right? And just when we thought it couldn't get any worse for the Broncos with the Russell Wilson trade, obviously Sunday it did. Broncos lost their 9th game of the year, a 10-9 absolute stinker against the Ravens, right? They had this game won. The defense played pretty well. Lamar Jackson goes out, and they still can't close it out, right? Noah Fant, meanwhile, one of the three players who was involved in that Russell Wilson trade, he goes to Seattle. He catches a touchdown against the Rams from Geno Smith. Setting the Herschel Walker trade aside, obviously, as the weird outlier that kind of always wins this conversation.
Because you have the 20 billion comp picks that Johnson got, and he so gamed the system that it's a whole different category.
Right. But if we put that one aside, I mean, we've still got plenty of candidates for perhaps the worst trade in football history. What's your pick here?
I forgot, and I was looking this up because at some point I'm going to have to do a piece on like the worst trades because it's obviously relevant. I forgot that the San Diego Chargers in 1998 didn't just take Ryan Leaf, and hey, Leaf has turned his life around. He's a solid guy. Good for him. But we have to go back and look at this. They didn't just take Ryan Leaf with the second overall pick in the 98 draft. They traded up from a third to second with the Arizona Cardinals to do so. And they gave up their third overall pick, the first round pick in the 99 draft, their second round pick in 98, and wide receiver Eric Metcalf, who was an all-pro, first team all-pro the year before, and
linebacker, man, what a stud.
Oh my God, what a player. And linebacker Patrick Sapp. In the return, the Chargers got the right to take Leaf with the second overall pick. We know how that went. The Cardinals picked up Andre Wadsworth, Corey Chavis, good player. David Boston, good for a while. With the picks they picked up, I believe the guys the Chargers selecting that draft, including Leaf, played like 100 total games in the NFL. And the Cardinals, with that trade, won the franchise's first postseason game since 1947 when the Chicago Cardinals beat the Eagles in the NFL championship game. That, my friends, is an uneven bargain. And I went down that road just because I think people forget that not only did the Chargers take the worst high-pick quarterback, the second worst behind Jamarcus Russell ever, they traded a metric bleep ton to do it, which is just amazing. So I left you the hanging slider.
You did. And you also mentioned Corey Chavis, who I love. Corey Chavis was doing draft analysis while he was a player.
Yeah.
I think it was whether he was in Arizona or Minnesota later in his career. He started a website, and he was one of the early draft analysts, long before Twitter or anything like that. So
I was talking to him in 2006. He's a brilliant guy. I like to see more of him.
I love to watch him and listen to him break down games. But yeah, you did. You left me the hanging curve right over the middle. The Ricky Williams trade, right? You traded your entire draft to go up and get a running back, and not the running back that was selected in the top 5 that year that went to the Hall of Fame, which was Edgerrin James. Again, you give up all of that to go up 2 spots, right? And then that's what they did, right? So Washington drops down to 12. Yeah, that's what it was. Washington drops down to 12. So they traded up 7 spots. Washington ends up moving back up to 7 with some of what they got, right? They get Champ Bailey, Hall of Fame corner, at 7. 2 picks after Ricky Williams goes. The pick after Ricky Williams, the 6th pick, should be and probably soon to be Hall of Fame wide receiver Torrey Holt, right?
Yeah.
So you get Edgerrin James at 4, Torrey Holt at 6, and Champ Bailey at 7, and Ricky Williams is the guy you traded your entire draft to go up and get at 5. So, nice work, Dicka. Well done.
How many Dickas would it take to have a worse trade than that? Da Bears. I don't know. Dicka.
Oh, man. Well, hey, this is trade related as well, but we had a couple of big revenge games in Week 13, right? You had A.J. Brown with the Eagles going back to play his previous team in the Tennessee Titans, who traded him away during the draft this year. Didn't want to pay him a contract, right? They knew what he was worth, didn't want to pay that for the wide receiver, so they traded him and drafted basically his clone in Treylon Burks from Arkansas. But you also saw Bobby Wagner, somebody obviously you're very familiar with from all your time in Seattle. He gets to play against the Seahawks, who let him walk, basically, right?
Released him.
He goes out
after the Wilson trade. They released him. They just said we don't think you're relevant to our future plans.
Yeah, which was, again, the Russell Wilson trade even then made more sense than that move, in my opinion. But hey, whatever. Listen, these revenge games, they always have a lot of hype, and then a lot of times they just don't live up to it. Both of these performances did. Which of these games from these players was more impressive to you Sunday?
And full marks to A.J. Brown. Was it Christian Fulton that A.J. Brown just ran over on that touchdown? I mean, it was like he
broke his ankles first and then ran him over because he fell down on the ground. So he actually got the illegal contact penalty, and then ran by him, leaving him on the ground for the touchdown.
And then they went with the same play because he's A.J. Brown. And yeah, I think Wagner's effort was more impressive in a single game set. And I'll say this about I covered the Seahawks, through the LOB. So
yep.
I don't say I know Wagner, but I've talked to him a lot. He's that quiet, sort of steady, consistent guy. He wasn't one of the, quote unquote alpha personalities making all the noise in the locker room. We all know those. Hi, Sherm. But he has a wicked, wicked, wicked chip on his shoulder. And it never was obvious, but you knew it was there. And you knew what he was going to do in this game. He had played pretty well this season, but there was no way, unless you knew Wagner, to expect what he did to Seattle's offense. The Rams lost the game 27-23. That was not at all on Wagner, who had 5 solo tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, a pass defense, and an interception. Given the issues the Seahawks have had on defense recently, especially at the linebacker position, Wagner showed just how much of a colossal mistake they made in letting him move on. I think if they had signed him to a couple-year deal, he would have done it. And as they're transitioning that defense with guys like Tariq Woolen and Nwosu, the pass rusher, who's been great this year, you have Wagner in the middle. You take him out, it makes a difference. And the Seahawks learned that the hard way.
Going back to Brown, it was impressive. And honestly, the most impressive thing is the play before that touchdown that we just mentioned. He scored also.
Yeah.
He caught a 41-yard touchdown on the previous play, and it was either a penalty or he was out of bounds, like barely or something like that. So they call it back. And then literally the next play, 41-yard touchdown again.
I think the refs just said, you're being mean to this cornerback. We're just going to throw a flag because it's hurting our feelings.
Yeah. Just because we can. But yeah, again, I think Wagner's is more impressive because, A.J. Brown, ascending player, got his new contract. Now he's in that dynamic offense, which, again, we talked earlier in the season on this show about what he does to open up that passing game in Philly. All of that's kind of what we expected. All the teams, involved.
Yeah.
Usually you don't get this type of performance from a guy where Wagner is, right? 32-year-old guy. Sure, he's future Hall of Famer. But he was, the Seahawks let him walk because they thought he wasn't worth what they were going to have to pay him, right? He had earned that payday from them, and they were like, it's too expensive. You're 32. We don't want to do it. So the fact that he did what he did at his age, at his point in his career to prove a point, but not only that, to do it for a Rams team who is done, right?
Oh.
I mean, all the players that got injured, their season is already over. They go into this game with nothing really to lose except some draft spots, basically. And he's like, hold my salmon sandwich here in terms of Seattle. It didn't go well. It didn't go well for them, and it made them look really silly, just like we thought it would. And again, it was more impressive considering all the context for him as a player and for where the Rams are this season. I thought that's what made it more impressive to me.
Yeah, let's put it this way. There are tape pieces I don't want to do, and the Jalen Ramsey tape piece is one of them. We'll just move on from there.
Oof. Well, hey, let's wrap it up with another devastating quarterback injury, right? It feels like that's kind of the theme of the season. It definitely was the theme of this weekend. We had a lot of high-profile quarterbacks, not all seriously injured, but dealing with injuries of various severities. But Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco, turns out he's got a broken foot. He's going to need surgery. He's out for the year now. Trey Lance already out for the year with his own injury from earlier in the year. Obviously, that puts Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers in a bit of a bind here. Trade deadline is passed, which we've already rehashed why that should not be the case moving forward in future seasons. But, do they go with Brock Purdy, the Mr. Irrelevant of the 2022 NFL draft, right? The very last pick in the draft, number 262. I mean, do they go free agent help? Purdy looked pretty good against, again, a Miami team that's not a bad defense, not a bad team. 25 of 37 for 210, a couple of touchdowns, 1 interception, passer rating of 88.8. If you're Shanahan, do you roll with this rookie and kind of hope for the best here, or do you try to find someone else on the market who's still available, Cam Newton, what have you? What's the better option for Shanahan and the Niners here?
Well, right before we taped this on Monday morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I did a Brock Purdy tape piece. I watched his all 22, and I'm like, okay. Now, Kyle Shanahan and Purdy both said after the game that the Dolphins ran a bunch of cover zero blitz, and that's partially true. But the Dolphins blitzed a ton, a lot of different looks, and they did, blitz and drop. It was cover 1. It was cover 3. They give him different stuff in the red zone. There was a lot of complexity of coverage the Dolphins did, and they're not always good at it, which is why they're not like a top 5 defense. But they threw the kitchen sink at him. And he responded pretty well. There were a couple of plays where his reads were late and his process was late. I mean, there was a reason he was the last player selected in the draft. He's also, there have been 7 quarterbacks taken in pro football history as Mr. Irrelevant. He's the only one to not only throw a regular season pass at all, but now 2 touchdown passes. The only top 10 defense per DVOA the 49ers faced in their last 5 games is the one they face in the Buccaneers next Sunday. I love Purdy's quote about something about I think he was born like the same week Tom Brady made his last start at Michigan. So #old. We all feel that way now. They've got a week there will be no victory Monday. They're in there right now. They're with Purdy. And I remember talking to Bruce Arians about this years ago when he had Drew Stanton, Carson Palmer got hurt. It's like, okay, Your install for your backup. Now he's there. It's like, okay, what are your 25? Like, what do you like? What do you do best? What did we do wrong? Where do you struggle? They've got a week to put this together. But I'll say this, Luke, they're 8-4. They're the 3rd seed in the NFC. This is not a total demolition of their playoff hopes. They went to a Super Bowl in that playoff run. Jimmy Garoppolo was on the Bob Greasy 1973 plan, like, don't throw the ball. And it was only in the Super Bowl when he had to throw the ball that things went the way they went. This is not a quarterback-needy team the way if, God forbid, Patrick Mahomes goes down, Chiefs are done. Right. They're done. Right. The really amazing quarterbacks in the NFL, as much as they paid Garoppolo and as much as they gave up for Trey Lance, they're not as quarterback-needy. I think Purdy understands the offense much better than anyone else could come in and do it because it's so complicated. They signed Josh Johnson.
It's so late in the year, right? It's so late in the year.
They signed Josh Johnson for his 4th stint with the 49ers. I don't believe he's thrown a pass with them, but he's there again. I stick with Purdy. I see how far I can go with him. I think one thing Shanahan said after the game is he liked the way Purdy was throwing the ball with touch and clarity and guts down the middle. Now, that's always been kind of a bugaboo with Garoppolo. He's never seen stuff well over the middle. His heat maps kind of show that. So I'm not saying he's going to be the next Kurt Warner or anything, but I think there's enough to work with there.
Yeah, I think so too. And again, we could talk about why the trade deadline needs to change in terms of allowing teams the freedom to not just acquire the players they need like they could here, but also for other teams who have those other quarterbacks sitting around and could use draft resources or what have you. I mean, that definitely needs to change, but they're obviously better rolling with Purdy. And you could see even in that game, you could see not just his confidence continue to grow, but the confidence of the team in him, right? Yes. You're moving the ball. You're distributing the ball to those playmakers. He's got Christian McCaffrey. He's got Deebo Samuel. He's got George Kittle. Mm-hmm. He's got guys that can make plays. Just, again, stay calm, don't make mistakes, distribute the ball, and let them do their jobs. I think, like you said, because of that defense, because of the playmakers he's got around him, they really don't need a ton from that position to be successful. They need a guy who can manage the game, a guy who can take care of the football, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think he did that really well on Sunday. I think his confidence grew. I think the teammates rallied around him, and once you see all that confidence come together, and again, now that you'll have a week to kind of tailor the game plan a little bit more to what he does well, I think that's a much better recipe for success going forward than bringing in someone else at this point. You have a chance to make a playoff run, a Super Bowl run. Stick with what you have and what those guys can believe in and what they saw on Sunday, and I think that's their best bet.
Kyle Shanahan talked about the 19-yard seam post to George Kittle. I believe it was in the second quarter where Jalen Phillips came in unblocked. The Dolphins really messed with the protection rules. The offensive line did not play well, so that was part of it. And Phillips just faced Purdy, and he made that slingshot throw. None of that. Kyle Shanahan told NBC Sports' Peter King after the game that Purdy pre-snap saw the blitz and told Kittle to adjust his route to a shorter, quicker post. It's pretty good.
That's the stuff.
You don't want, all due respect to Cam Newton or whoever, Cam Newton's not going to know that. He's not going to have the familiarity with it's not Cam Newton is good or bad. He's not going to know that because he's not been there the whole season. He's not working with Brian Greasy and, all those guys, and it's just a different story.
It is a different story. It'll be a different story for us next week, Doug, when we break down Week 14. That's fantasy playoffs are right around the corner, right after you. For most of you, it's after next week. We're getting to the end of the season, the home stretch here. A lot of good football left to be played. A lot of playoff spots still up for grabs, and we can't wait to break it all down for you every Monday. Again, for Doug Farrar, I'm Luke Easterling. Thanks so much for watching, as always, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, everybody.